And welcome everybody to the Geeking Poetic podcast channel. I'm your host Larry Roberts, and finally we have another installment of the Kiss Vinyl Show. Yes, on this show we talk about Kiss records, Kiss vinyl. In this instance, we're going to be talking about Kiss singles. Yes, I'm talking about the old school 45 singles. You remember these things with the big hole in the middle. Yeah, I thought it would be fun to do something a little bit different. Last couple times we talked about the studio albums from the 1970s, as well as ranking all of their official live content. And that was a lot of fun. I want to thank you all for your views, your likes, and your comments. Please keep those comments coming. I love to get feedback about what albums are your favorites or which ones you would rank higher. And of course, please hit the subscribe button, hit that bell so that you know when new content like this is coming out. So regarding singles, what I thought I would do this time around was I'm going to focus on the Kiss singles box set that came out some years back. If you're not familiar with this box set, this is the Kiss CASABLANCA singles box set, 1974 to 1982. So basically, it covers all of the singles that the band released during what most people would consider to be their classic era. So from the first album in 1974 to the last makeup, or at least original makeup era album, Creatures of the Night, in 1982. So this box set is really cool. It actually came with 29 singles in it. It also comes with this book that tells you a little bit of backstory about each one of the singles. Yeah, if you don't have this, I recommend it. I think you can still find this out there for a fairly reasonable price, but I thought it would be fun to go through all 29 singles included in this box set and rank them. How am I going to rank them? Well, let me explain that real quick. I mean, to be honest with you, I don't play these 45s all that often, so the way I'm going to rank this is a little bit different. So first of all, of course, naturally, whether I like the songs on the record are going to factor into this. But it's also a matter of looking at, like, how viable of a single was this? Some of these singles in this set were extremely successful. They were really well thought out, well planned, and they made an impact. And some of the other singles in this box set did not. So I'm taking that into account, and there's also going to be certain other little technicalities here because there were things that were done, such as radio edits and such, that really did affect how successful the song was translated onto a single. And there's a couple instances where it really negatively affected a single, if you ask my opinion, but we'll talk about that when we get to it. So this isn't just simply a matter of me ranking how good or how bad these songs are. I'm not doing this as like least favorite to most favorite songs. There's more to it than that. It specifically has to do with the songs as a single and how it worked in that format. Also, let me just say this. This is not going to be as complete as it could be. Even though there are 29 singles in this box set, there are some singles that were omitted, especially ones that were released only in very specific markets overseas from North America. There's like the I single from The Elder, Talk to Me from Unmasked, the Creatures of the Night single. Those were not included in this box set, and so as such, I'm not going to touch on them, although they will get some mention in this list. And obviously, it goes without saying, this is just my opinion. This is just the way I see it, based on my memories, my listening habits, and the things that I know about these singles growing up, because I remember when a lot of these came out back in the late 70s and into the early 80s. So this is just my opinion. But all right, without any further ado, let's get into ranking the 29 singles in the CASABLANCA Years singles box set. All right, coming in at number 29. Yeah, this is going to piss off some of the Peter Criss fans out there. I apologize, but something's got to come in last place, and for me, it is You Matter to Me from the Peter Criss solo album. I mean, I like this song, but they decided to release 2 singles from this album, and I think that was overkill. This was not the one that I would have chosen to be a single, and I think a lot of people out there at the time tended to agree because it really didn't go anywhere. Although, that being said, the packaging for the solo album singles is really cool. and I love that it's got the colored vinyl. So very collectible. It's a really cool single to have, but in terms of just the overall package and the songs and its impact as a single, it just didn't really do much for me. Coming in at number 28, we have the first single the band released from their 1980 album Unmasked, and that is Shandy, backed with She's So European. So the Unmasked album is definitely a love it or hate it for a lot of Kiss fans out there. I actually really like the album overall, but there are some songs that I do skip pretty frequently when I listen to that album, and unfortunately, Shandy's one of those songs that I skip. You know, I understand why they thought this would be a good single, because it is definitely a more watered down, radio friendly type of song. I don't even know that anybody from Kiss besides Paul Stanley even appears on the recording of this song. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I thought this was all pretty much Paul doing it himself with Anton Fig and some other musicians. And it sounds like it. It's not a terrible song. I know the fans down under love this song, and I understand why, and I think that's cool. But I don't know. To me, this was just kind of ineffectual, and it really didn't do anything for their career at the time, especially here in North America. It just kind of floated right over everybody's heads, and they forgot about it almost as soon as it came out. Music video for it was kind of cool, but most people didn't even see that until years later. But anyway, Shandy, yeah, I don't hate it, but not the best single. All right, coming in at number 27. Yep, it is the other single from Peter Criss's solo album. It is Don't You Let Me Down. Now, I definitely think this was a smarter choice for a single from this album. I could understand why they would go with this, because it's a little bit more ballady. Peter obviously was known a little bit more for the ballads because of Beth and Hard Luck Woman. But again, it's just not necessarily the strongest song that he could have put out there. This doesn't compare to Beth. This is not a Beth. I'm sorry. It's not a bad song. But again, this was just another one that as a single, it never really ranked very highly for me. Yeah, I'm sorry. I know there are people out there, you guys love this album. You love all these songs. I'm sure there's people that are going to get very mad at me, and you're going to rank this single a lot more highly than I did. But for me, yeah, I'm sorry, folks. It's 27. All right, coming in at number 26. Yeah, we've got a little bit of a theme here, because it is the other single from the Unmasked album they included in here. It is Tomorrow, backed with Naked City. So while Unmasked is an album, like I said, that there are songs that I definitely skip on there, ironically, Tomorrow's not one of them. I actually really like this song. I think it's a really good song, and it's one that as a single, it's a really catchy song. It's got great hooks. It's the production and the way they approached it, it's pretty light. It was definitely meant to be radio friendly. I think it's something that if some other artist would have done this song, it probably would have done really well on the charts. But as such, as a Kiss single, it just wasn't doing the band any favors at the time, because I think it wasn't what most Kiss fans, again, at least around my parts, did not want to hear. Yeah, again, I don't know. As radio friendly and poppy as this album is, it just didn't work in the way they wanted it to, in terms of them thinking it was going to give them more commercial success or be a bigger hit on the radio than these songs were. They just didn't work in that context. And so, but yeah, I just don't think it was a really successful single, by any stretch of the imagination. Coming in at number 25. Oh, this is a tough one for me, because I am a big fan of this album, but I have to be honest and fair. Number 25 is from 1981. A World Without Heroes, from the Music from the Elder album. Now look, I think this is a great song in its own right, but as we all know, The Elder was probably the most contentious and controversial album that the band ever put out. And fans even today are still very divided on how they feel about the songs on this album. And I think that The Elder being such a jump in a different direction was tough enough, but if they would have released another song like I as the first single here, again, at least speaking about North America, I think that might have fared a little bit better since it was more of a rockin' song, but instead they came out with A World Without Heroes, which it's a beautiful song. A lot of Kiss fans, even people that don't like The Elder, there's a lot of Kiss fans that acknowledge this as a really cool song. But as a single, this didn't help them out at all. And if anything, I think this might have actually hurt them and hurt The Elder overall, because after people were done with the poppiness of Unmasked and the disco rock of I Was Made for Lovin' You and things like that, I don't think this is what people were hoping for. I think if you would have given them something a little more rocking, they might have welcomed The Elder a little bit more. But as such, this single did not help Kiss at all. And so I have to kind of rank it lower because of that. It's a good song, but not a great single. All right, coming in at number 24, we have one of the earliest singles that the band ever released, and one with an interesting story to it. We have 1974's Kissin' Time. Now, I'm sure many of you already know, but to give a really brief story on this, this was actually recorded after the first album was released. Neil Bogart came up with the idea of the band and Casablanca Records working together to do a kiss-off competition. Just some, silly idea to come up with to get them national attention. It did get them in the news. It got them on TV shows and such, and he wanted a single to go along with it, so he picked this old Bobby Rydell song. And you know what? It's a fun song. I mean, it's a novelty kind of record to me. I always looked at this as sort of a novelty song for them. Some people love it, some people just disregard it. To me, it was not a song that ever really mattered that much to me, even once they did tack it on the later pressings of the debut album as the first song on side 2. Kissin' Time, it's fine. I understand why it existed, but again, it was another thing that other than getting them some press, it really didn't get them anywhere in terms of chart success or building up a bigger fan base. So to me, this is just kind of an inconsequential single. All right, coming in at 23. Now this one is going to be controversial, but before you go and start slamming on that thumbs down button, I want you to hear me out because there's some very important details that explain why this single is ranking so low. And I'm talking about the single version of Detroit Rock City. Now, again, I'm sure you're looking at me like crazy, like, dude, it's Detroit Rock City. It's one of the greatest Kiss songs of all time. You are not wrong. I love this song. It's a wonderful song. It's one of the most classic rock songs of all time. So why am I ranking it so low? Well, because again, I'm not ranking it based on my love of the song. I'm talking about the single, and this single is a freaking mess. So for many of you, if you're not familiar with the 45 single version of Detroit Rock City that's on here, they edited the living shit out of this song to fit it onto the single. And you know what? There are other Kiss songs that are in this list here that had some edits done to them that are to varying levels acceptable or even like hardly noticeable. This one is a disaster. In fact, the story is very famous that this single ended up flopping. They really thought that this was going to do so much better. They had people on board that were going to push this on radio stations, and it just didn't do that well. And I know for a lot of people, they've probably wondered like, well, man, why was it not successful? Was it just too heavy for audiences, or did they just not get it? Well, that might have held true to some degree, but I think, and I know there are other people in the industry that believe that this single tanked because it was a terrible representation of this song. If you have not heard the single edit, look it up. I'm sure it's on YouTube or it's somewhere to listen to. They edited this song so poorly. It doesn't even make sense the way some of the edits are. It literally at times, it'll sound like the record is skipping. That's how badly they edited this. It's so chopped up. It took away so much from this song. It is no wonder that this tanked. So no, I'm not ranking this low because of anything against Detroit Rock City. Quite the opposite. Detroit Rock City deserved better than what they got with this piece of shit single. This was an atrocity, and it totally makes sense why this didn't do better. It's just such a terrible edit, and it's one of the most egregious examples of why they shouldn't edit songs like that for radio. This is one of the worst I've ever heard. But we will be talking more about this single technically a little bit farther down the line. Coming in at number 22, we have the single from the 1978 Gene Simmons solo album, Radioactive. Yeah, this is another one, just like the Peter Criss one earlier. It comes on the colored vinyl. Definitely a cool collectible vinyl piece, but as a single, this did okay, I guess, from what I understand. I remember hearing it once or twice on the radio when I was a kid. I would get excited to hear it, of course, but I don't know. I don't think that this was necessarily going to be the strongest thing that Gene could have put out to represent what he was doing with that album. Obviously, they played this song on the Dynasty tour the next year. It did make sense to be the song that they picked for the whole band to play. It's okay. It's okay as a single, but I don't know. A lot of people don't rank the Gene Simmons album all that highly. I do. I actually quite like the Gene Simmons solo album, but as a single, like I said, just like with the Peter Criss ones, it's not that impactful, and it's kind of a skip. So coming in at number 21, we have a song from 1979's Dynasty. It is the Sure Know Something single, backed with Dirty Livin'. Now, after the huge success they had with the first single from Dynasty, I'm sure they were counting on this one to be a big success as well, but unfortunately, Sure Know Something just didn't have the impact that they thought it would. They even made a promo video for it, which is great. I loved that video. And I actually really loved this song, but it just wasn't all that successful as a single. Dirty Livin' on the B-side probably didn't help things much because that was the other big disco-y song from Dynasty, and that is definitely a love it or hate it for a lot of fans out there. Yeah, this just wasn't that impactful of a single, and honestly, this probably would have just been better off being the B-side of I Was Made for Lovin' You. I think they were being overly hopeful with how this one was going to do, but it just didn't make much of an impact. All right, we've made it into the top 20, and at number 20, I have another solo album single, and that is Hold Me, Touch Me from the Paul Stanley solo album. Yeah, I mean, if you're familiar with this song, you know it's pretty light, it's pretty schmaltzy and romantic. It was definitely playing up the whole lover, star-child romantic side of Paul Stanley's character. And I don't think that did him a lot of favors at the time. I think that actually it would have been better if he would have put out one of his more rockin' songs from this album. I think It's Alright was like totally destined to be a radio rock hit, but they chose not to go that way. Tonight You Belong to Me is a really, really strong song, and I would have thought that would have been a much better choice from this album because it does have a romantic side to it, but it's harder rockin'. There's some great guitar work on that one. I could have totally seen Tonight You Belong to Me being an FM radio staple, but instead they chose Hold Me, Touch Me, and I think for even a lot of people that are fans of this album, this isn't necessarily most people's favorite song on the album. So as a single, yeah, again, I just don't think they made the right choice with this one, and it's kind of inconsequential as a result. Coming in at number 19, we have one of the singles from 1977's Love Gun album, and it is the controversial Christine 16. All right, look, all things aside of how a lot of people now consider this song to be fairly creepy. It was kind of creepy back then, too, I'll be honest with you. But, I mean, I know Gene was keeping in context with a lot of those old songs from the late 50s, early 60s, Sweet Little 16 and all that stuff. That's fine. I mean, I tend to prefer this song live, but we already talked about that before. I'm not going to get into that again. As far as a single, I understand why they chose this as a single. It's hooky. It does have that kind of vibe to it, like you would hear possibly on an AM radio station, a rock station at the time. It did have some chart success, so I can't take that away from it. But, I don't know. It's just not, for me, one of my personal favorites. It wasn't a single that I cared much about when I was a kid, although it does have Shock Me on the B-side, which is awesome. To me, that would have been my A-side. Absolutely would have been Shock Me. Christine 16, you could be on the B-side, man. Like, I don't need that. But anyway, yeah, just this is a personal preference thing for me. This is not a single out of this box set that I could see myself wanting to go and put on very often. So, yeah, it's number 19. All right, coming in at number 18. It is the first single that Kiss ever released from February 1974. We are talking about Nothing to Lose, backed with Love Theme from Kiss. Now, you might be wondering why I would rank Nothing to Lose so far down. There's a couple reasons for this. I do like this song quite a bit, but I don't think this was really the right first single for them. That first album is just chock full of incredible songs, and Nothing to Lose just didn't seem like the one that really should have been pushed forward as the first representation of the band. I think there are other songs, some that they did end up releasing later, that would have been better and might have made more of an impact, but yeah, for whatever reason, they decided that a song about weird anal sex escapades would be right one, because that's what it's about, apparently, according to Gene Simmons. It's about, yeah, when he's talking about the back door, that's what he's talking about in this song. But yeah, this didn't make the big impact that the band nor Neil Bogart and Casablanca Records had hoped for. And Love Theme from Kiss is a B-side. It makes sense. You know, Love Theme, it's a cool song, but let's face it, if ever a song was meant to just be a B-side, it's Love Theme from Kiss. So, cool single, cool enough to have, but even as a single, as you could see, they didn't do any kind of special packaging. This was no frills, white sleeve, they just put this out there like this. And yeah, it's just not a single that I get real excited about, so that's why it's kind of in the middle of the pack for me. So, coming in at number 17, here's another one of those odd singles, kind of like I was talking about earlier when it comes to special radio edits and single edits and whatnot. It is Strutter 78 from the Double Platinum album. Okay, so this single is interesting for a couple of reasons. First of all, most of you know that they did a new version of Strutter called Strutter 78 that they put on the Greatest Hits compilation Double Platinum in April of 1978. And they made a little bit of a different kind of drum beat for it. That was a little bit supposed to be, I guess, more dancey, disco-y or something. They added some different guitar solos, a little bit of extra vocals in there. And, you know, as such, it's fine. I actually like it. But what's interesting, a lot of people don't know, is that the single version is actually even different from the album version of Strutter 78. If you listen to this single version, man, it does not sound the same. They did a completely different kind of mix job on this. They edited the song a little bit more. It has this more big, almost kind of reverby hall cavernous sound to it. It's kind of cool in its own way, but I'm not entirely sure why they did that, because this doesn't really sound more radio friendly to me than the version that ended up on Double Platinum. And I both like it and dislike it for that reason. I like that it's kind of weird. I was shocked when I heard this and compared it against the album and went, wow, that sounds really, really different. So it's cool to have as a curiosity, and it's cool to have this because it stands out on its own. It's only available in this mix on this record right here. But, you know, it's just okay as a single. It didn't do anything really in the charts. It didn't help the band at all. It isn't really the most logical choice they could have made for promoting the Double Platinum album, but whatever. That's what they did, and for me, this is number 17. All right, coming in at number 16 is a song that I'm actually quite fond of. And this is one of the singles, I think this was the second single that was released from the album Destroyer, and it is none other than Flamin' Youth. Now, here's an example of how they can edit a song for a single and do it in a non-offensive way. Basically, they just sort of shortened the ending a little bit. I think it just fades out a little bit earlier because it does have that longer, drawn-out ending on the album. And that's fine. I don't don't mind when they do that. Hell, back in the day, the DJs would usually start talking over the outro anyway or fading it out themselves. So doing that, I'm okay with. It's a great song. I loved this single as a kid, but it's one that I don't necessarily think this was the right choice for a single for them. I don't think this was going to make an impact. It certainly didn't make an impact the way other more obvious songs on the album could have made an impact. Detroit Rock City should have made an impact, but they botched that one, like I already said. Had they not botched that, I think that would have done much better than this single did. But yeah, it's fine. It's great. It's Flamin' Youth, man. It's a classic. So that's why, again, it's right there in the middle of my list. It's not an absolute must-have, must-listen-to single. It wasn't one of their great successes, but it's cool. Coming in at number 15, we have the single from their second album, Hotter Than Hell. It is Let Me Go Rock and Roll. Now, this was the only single that I can think of that was released from the Hotter Than Hell album, and it didn't chart at all. I don't think this did them any favors whatsoever. It's a great little rock and roll song, though. I can understand why they chose this one, but again, I just don't think that this was maybe the best choice for them. I feel like there were more solid, stronger songs on this album. Of course, the other problem is, again, even though a lot of us do love the Hotter Than Hell album for the way it sounds, I mean, it's love it or hate it. Some people hate it. I don't think that the mix did this song and this single any favors. It doesn't sound good on the radio. It certainly couldn't match up with a lot of the other stuff that was playing on the radio in 74, 75. So it gets ranked in the middle of my list because I'm just very fond of this album. I'm very fond of this song. I love that it's got the title track on the flip side. It's a great single that I like to listen to, but I can't lie and pretend like this was a super successful release because as a single, it just wasn't. All right, coming in at number 14, we have the title track from their 1977 album, Love Gun. So yep, it's the Love Gun single backed with Hooligan. So yeah, contrary to popular belief, because of the comments I made in my album ranking video, I actually really like the Love Gun album. And this song especially, I think is great. As a single, I loved it. The harder rock fans, I definitely think appreciated this single, but I don't necessarily think that this was going to be the best thing to try and get played on like AM radio back in the day, which is ultimately, like it or not, that was the point of these singles coming out. It was to try and get them into the top 40 and get played. It had a little bit of success, but this song was just way too aggressive and rockin'. I mean, it's one of their best songs in my opinion. Paul was really at the top of his game when he created this. I love everything about this song, but it just isn't a single that did as well as I think it could have. But even so, at number 14, I mean, yeah, this is still a fairly essential single. I think any of these singles that are in the top 15 here in this top half of the list are pretty great in their own right, but just in terms of success and stuff, it just didn't do all that good. And Hooligan on the B-side, it's not one that I would put on too often. I'm not the hugest fan of that song, but it's fine as a B-side. All right, coming in at number 13, we have the first single released for their 1976 album, Destroyer. It is Shout It Out Loud. So this is another one that they were really big on doing at the time, was editing these songs for the radio. Thankfully, the edits on this one are fairly minimal. They just shortened the length a little bit for AM radio at the time, and it really doesn't affect the song negatively. This is another single that I have very fond memories of my buddy and I playing over and over again. We loved Shout It Out Loud. We'd flip it over and listen to Sweet Pain. Just a great single that was crafted perfectly. I think this should have done much better than it did. It's such a great song. It's such an anthemic song. I think it was just so different at the time. I don't know if maybe fans just didn't know what to make of it. Radio was still kind of catching up to what Kiss was, and they hadn't really reached the stratosphere yet in terms of popularity, so I think this deserved better than it got. But yeah, so for me, this is a really solid number 13. right, coming in at number 12. I have a feeling this is going to be controversial for some people because they're going to expect this to be way towards the top of the list. But it doesn't make it to the top of my list, and hear me out and let me explain exactly why. Number 12 for me is 1975's live version of Rock and Roll All Night. Now, I understand, again, I want you to, before you start going to hit that damn thumbs down button, I want you to hear me out, just like I asked earlier with Detroit Rock City, because yes, the live version of Rock and Roll All Night is great. The one that's on the Alive album, fantastic. The version that's on this single, not so much. Now, granted, this single did do very well, and this was, highly attributed to Kiss's big breakthrough and finally getting success. But the biggest problem I have with this is that the edit they did to it is not great, and they cut a huge part of the live guitar solo, which is blasphemy. Because let's face facts, as Kiss fans, what is one of the greatest things about the live version of Rock and Roll All Night compared to the studio version? What is it? The guitar solo. Ace's solo on this song is legendary. You can sing it. Everybody knows that guitar solo, and the single version chops it up. I'm sorry. I'm not ranking the song in itself. The live version of Rock and Roll All Night that's on Alive is great. The single version of it is not. I give it credit, and I ranked it as highly as I did because of its importance in history and what it meant for the band in terms of their success. But frankly, do I ever want to sit down and put this single on, whether I actually put the record on or if I had an MP3 of it or whatever, do I ever want to sit down and listen to this single version of it? No, because this weirdly neutered version that's missing one of the greatest attributes of it, which is the full guitar solo, is just kind of pointless. So yes, it gets points for what it means in the history of the band, but it gets a lot of points knocked off because of the bad edit that they did. But yeah, so understand that's why this isn't in like the top 10 or the top 5. It's just because of the edit. If it was just the regular unedited version, it'd probably be at least in the top 3. All right, coming in at number 11, it is the single released from Creatures of the Night in 1982, and it is none other than I Love It Loud. Now, I have to admit, this did not have huge chart success for the band, although I do think that chart numbers don't totally accurately reflect what this meant to a lot of Kiss fans at the time, because for a lot of us, even those of us that liked The Elder and liked Unmasked and liked Dynasty, this was still such a breath of fresh air when we first heard this song. Whether we heard it on the radio, the little bit it got played on the radio, or we heard it on jukeboxes. I remember being a kid and going into a pizza place and they had this single in the jukebox, and that was really exciting. Or because of the music video that did get some airplay back in the day on the early fledgling MTV station. All we knew was that Kiss looked like Kiss again. They sounded like Kiss. In fact, they sounded like a bigger, maybe better version of themselves than they had been in years. Yeah, this was just a mind blower for a lot of us. Unfortunately, it was way too heavy for the time. For 1982, it was a couple of years ahead of its time. I think if this would have came out in 1984, 85, when you had the bands like Motley Crue and Rat and Scorpions and more of them being in the top 20 and the top 40, this might have fared better. But in 1982, this just really didn't stand a chance on the charts. But that doesn't take away from what a great single it is. It's got another good song on the B-side. It's got Paul's Danger on there. And, I think that's a perfect B-side for this. Yeah, this is a single that as a kid, loved playing this one over and over again, just flipping it over, A and B. A very solid single. I realize some people might not rank this one as highly as me, but it's my list, and for me, this is super solid at number 11. All right, and we have made it into my top 10 of these 29 singles in this Casablanca Years box set. And coming in at number 10 for me, it is Rocket Ride from Alive 2. Now, I've talked in past videos about what a big fan I am of Alive 2, and especially of the studio songs that were on side 4 of Alive 2. And to me, Rocket Ride might have been the best of all of them on there. To me, this was Ace Frehley just firing on all cylinders, man. It's got some of the greatest guitar work he ever did on a Kiss song. And even for a harder rockin' song like this, it's a really, really catchy song, and I could see it making sense to be on the radio because it is an infectious earworm kind of song, especially that chorus. I also love the fact that it has the live version of Tomorrow and Tonight on the B-side, which I know a lot of people don't rank that song very highly, but for me, the live version of Tomorrow and Tonight is excellent. It's always been one of my favorites, even though I know it's not technically live. They recorded it at soundcheck or whatever it was. I don't care. To me, it's the live version. Now, the only reason this didn't rank even more highly is because, once again, they did edit the song. It was too long to be put on a single to be considered for rock and pop radio at the time. So yeah, it breaks my heart that it is edited. But even then, it's not unlistenable. They just ended up chopping off the end of the song with the extended guitar solo and drum solo bits and stuff. I would much prefer to listen to the full version of the song, but even so, it's still cool that this exists as a single, and it's Ace at his best. So yeah, for me, it's number 10. Now, coming in at number 9, some people might again be surprised that this didn't come in a little bit higher than number 9, because this was one of their most successful singles they ever put out. But yeah, for me, number 9 is going to be I Was Made for Lovin' You from the Dynasty album in 1979. So again, I mean, I Was Made for Lovin' You, it's as big of a song as it is. It's a love it or hate it for a lot of Kiss fans. A lot of fans feel like this was the beginning of the end for the band, at least for them, as listeners and fans. For a bunch of us, we still loved it. I love it. I don't listen to it that much. I mean, I've heard this song so many times in my life. This is not a single that I'm ever really going to be drawn towards putting on, although I do give it bonus points for putting Hard Times as the B-side, because that's a great album track, another Ace banger that deserves more attention. But yeah, I mean, it makes it into the top 10 because, again, this was a huge one for them. As a kid, I really liked it. As an adult, you know, I could kind of take it or leave it, but I have to acknowledge how important this was in just the growing lore and success of Kiss. So I feel like it does belong in the top 10, but it, you know, just a little further down in the top 10 for me, if you catch my meaning. So coming in at number 8, it is a favorite song of mine and a really good one, I think, for the radio at the time. I loved hearing this on the radio. It is from the Rock and Roll Over album, Calling Dr. Love. So this is the last radio edited single in this list. And while that ended up being a factor that affected other singles negatively, this one, it didn't really affect it that much. I don't feel like the edit that they did on this is all that bad. And it really doesn't detract from the hook and the power of this song. The edit makes sense for the radio. I never had a problem with it, even as a kid. It's Calling Dr. Love, man. What a great song this is. This is one that, over the years, I've met people that are music fans, but not necessarily Kiss fans, who are very familiar with this song. They say they remember hearing it on the radio, or it just stuck in their head. It made sense to release this as a single, even though it's a little bit of a harder rocker, but it's so infectiously hooky and catchy. It belongs in the top 10, absolutely. And yeah, I wish it had done even better than it did, but it still got some respect, and rightfully so. Coming in at number 7 on my ranking list of the 29 singles in the Casablanca box set, it is 1978's New York Groove from the Ace Frehley solo album. Now, look, this is not necessarily the greatest song from the Ace album. I think most of us probably know that. It's a great song not only in the history of Kiss, but in the history of Ace specifically, because this was a big hit for him, and it was the biggest hit of all the singles released from the solo albums, which really took everybody by surprise at the time. Everything about this single screams top 20 hit. It's got an infectious chorus, it's really catchy, the production is perfect for the radio. I mean, honestly, the only thing missing from it is a great Ace Frehley guitar solo, but again, in the context of top 20 radio, it makes sense. This is just a really well-rounded single. It did very well and deservedly so, and so for me, that's why this ranks so high. All right, coming in at number 6, it is the last single released for the debut album back in 1974. I am talking about Strutter. Now, this is the single that's been getting a lot of attention lately because recently Kiss just announced that they were releasing an anniversary version of this in plated gold that I think is going for $2,500. And then there's one that's actually just like pure gold. It's like 8 ounces of gold for $50,000. So I'm sure all of us are just running to our computers right now to go buy those. It's ridiculous, but hey, it's Kiss. Does this shock you at all? They do things like this from time to time. But that being said, that doesn't take away from the greatness or the potential greatness of Strutter as a single. Yeah, this should have been the first single they released for the album. I don't know what they were thinking by choosing Nothing to Lose over Strutter. This is so much more catchy and so much more representative of what was great about Kiss back in 1974. Again, I'm not knocking Nothing to Lose. It's a cool song, but that isn't necessarily anywhere near as strong of a song as Strutter. I think evidenced by the fact that Strutter made it through most of their career. It came and went from live set lists over the years, but almost all the way up to the very end, this song got played. Everybody knows Strutter. Everybody loves Strutter. It's a fantastic song, and it's a fantastic single. This should have been a success. It really wasn't, but I think that over time, this song definitely had a lasting impact on a lot of music fans. So I couldn't put this more high up on the list. It doesn't make it into the top 5 because it wasn't more successful on the charts, but success in terms of it being a great song, deservingly made a single, and what should have been, and what it means to me too, because that does factor into this. This is my list, and it's what these singles mean to me and how they impress on me. This is way up there. So Strutter, yeah, this is a good one. All right, we are in the top 5, and coming in at number 5, it's one of my favorite songs from one of my favorite albums, and it's a favorite single of mine too. It is from 1975's Dressed to Kill, Come On and Love Me, backed with Getaway. So just like Strutter, and keeping in theme of songs that were meant to be singles but just did not get the chart success that they deserved, Come On and Love Me is a fantastic song and totally makes sense as a single. I don't know why this didn't catch on more. Again, I think it was just because Kiss was still struggling on the charts. They were struggling in terms of rock radio and people accepting their studio output. Obviously, that all changed later after Alive and after Destroyer, but this is a great single. Getaway as a flip side, perfect B-side. Another one that I would play over and over again. Some people love and some people hate Neil Bogart's production style that he did on singles like this and on the Dressed to Kill album as a whole. I personally think Neil's production style totally made sense for what was happening on the radio at the time. And it shows on this single. It sounds clean and clear. It's kind of bubblegum, power poppy in its own way. I love it. I just think this is a great single. Again, yeah, maybe I'm giving it too many points because it wasn't that successful, but for me, this one I feel very strongly about. It is my solid number 5. Coming in at number 4, we have the big breakout single from 1976's Rock and Roll Over album. Yes, I am talking about Hard Luck Woman. Now, I'll be honest with you. I think that this song and this single represents the first time that Kiss really became truly perfectly in sync with what was happening on the radio and in popular music at the time. When you think back to what was happening at the time on the radio, it was artists like Boz Scaggs, America, and most importantly, Rod Stewart. That kind of music they were doing was really successful. It was really striking a chord with the public, and a song like Hard Luck Woman perfectly fit that niche. I mean, honestly, this sounds like a Rod Stewart song. You could play it for somebody that doesn't know Kiss and they would think it was a Rod Stewart song or somebody trying to sound like that, which was exactly what it was. Peter's vocals on this are superb. The songwriting is great. Paul really knocked it out of the park with this one. The acoustic 12-string guitars on it, everything about this song and this single was done perfectly. And it was a fairly successful single. I think it should have done even better than it did. But as such, it still really helped propel this band even further to stardom. Deservedly so. This is a great single. And, of course, I just got to mention that on the B-side, it's got Mr. Speed, which is an awesome album track. Totally deserving of being a really solid B-side. This is just a great single, and yeah, it deserves to be right up there. All right, coming in at number 3, keeping in the theme of Peter Criss hit singles. Yep, it is 1976's Beth. Now, obviously, way further back in this video, further down the list, I talked about the Detroit Rock City single and what a travesty that was, the terrible edit. The reason why I ranked it so poorly was because Detroit Rock City was just a failure as a single because of the way they did it. But what was interesting about that single, everybody probably knows the story, is the B-side of that single was Beth. It was a song that Peter Criss sang, and the rest of the band basically blew it off. They didn't think it was going to be anything worth, writing home about. But Bob Ezrin knew better, and the people that were working rock radio at the time knew better, and they flipped the single over. They ended up finding themselves with a massive hit, even more massive than Rock and Roll All Night. And that was what really rocketed the band to stardom. And if it wasn't for Beth, I don't know, the Kiss that we know now, what came later, Love Gun, Rock and Roll Over, Dynasty, all of that may not have happened, at least not the way it did, if it wasn't for this single. Now, yes, do I sit around and listen to Beth all the time anymore? No, I've heard this song so many freaking times in my life. I could probably sing it to you backwards. I know this song so well. So, no, this isn't something I'm going to sit around and play much. But I have to give it its props for what it is. It ranks so highly because without the Beth single, a lot of this other stuff just wouldn't have happened. And it is an absolutely gorgeous song if you get away from how burned out you are on the song and everything. And it's not a typical Kiss song. In its own right, what a masterpiece it is. Bob Ezrin really knew what he was doing with this one. And maybe the band doesn't have to thank him for all the choices he made as a producer at the time. But when it came to Beth, yeah, they should be thanking their lucky stars for this one because it is a masterpiece. All right, we're in the top 2 here. And yeah, my number 2, I think, is probably a surprise. This is sort of like the sneaky one in there, the sleeper hit for me, because I don't think most people would probably rank this so highly, but hear me out when I explain why, because I feel really strongly about this one. And to me, the number 2 single for me out of this box is Shout It Out Loud, the live version from Kiss Alive 2. Okay, so I already stated earlier that Shout It Out Loud is a great song, and this song was made to be a single, in my opinion. I think this was just totally tailor-made to be a single. So you might say, well, why didn't the studio version then rank at number 2? Well, Shout It Out Loud wasn't a terrible edit, like I mentioned earlier, but it doesn't have the full energy and aura that this live version of Shout It Out Loud has. Now, I know some people don't care that much for Alive 2. They feel like it's not truly live. It's not the same kind of vibe like what you would find on Kiss Alive, the first album. Again, the live version of Rock and Roll All Night, had that not been such a butchered edit job as a single, that probably would have wound up here at number 2 or maybe even number 1. But because they edited that got pushed down. When I really thought about it and I really went and listened to these singles again, I just think that as a kid, hearing this on the radio, hearing this live version of Shout It Out Loud, it brought me, goosebumps. It made my hair stand on end. It projected through the radio in just over 3 minutes everything that you would expect in your mind from a live Kiss bombastic show. It's a great single. It did okay on the charts. It should have done even better than it did, but I feel very, very strongly about this one. And the thing that makes it even doubly cool to me is that on the flip side, it has the live version of Nothing to Lose from Kiss Alive. So just on this one single, you get this great taste of 2 of the greatest live albums ever released. This one is nearly perfect. It's just a great single. I would totally hand this to somebody if they were like, what's the big deal about Kiss Live? Can you prove it to me in just a couple of songs? I would hand them this because this just rocks. All right, here we are. We are at number 1. And so you might say, well, what is the number 1? Well, there's only one single left in this box set. And this is the one that, it means a lot to me personally, and it's the one that I feel the strongest about because of what it meant to the band. And even though this particular version of the single initially didn't do that well, I do think it still had a big impact on them in the long run. And I'm talking about the studio version of Rock and Roll All Night from Dressed to Kill. So look, okay, we all know that the live version is the one that skyrocketed up the charts, and it's the one that helped make them super famous, and it's the one that helped make Alive such a successful album. But again, not to keep harping on about it, that edit they did for that single, while that might have helped them at the time, it's unlistenable. I can't listen to that single. I'm sorry. Chopping the guitar solo up is terrible. Yes, there is no guitar solo on this studio version, but it's better than chopping it up, personally, I think. And you know what? I love the studio version of Rock and Roll All Night. I absolutely love this version. I remember hearing it as a kid. I remember it, of course, very fondly being a kid and hearing it in the beginning credits of Kiss Meets the Phantom. And the studio version has popped up in many other places over the years. It was in Dazed and Confused. It's been in all kinds of things. The studio version is great. Obviously, one of the things that does make this a lesser version than the live one to me is the lack of the guitar solo. But again, we're specifically talking about the singles here. And to me, this single mattered. When they put this out, they knew this should be a hit. And it should have been. And I'll tell you what, this also appears, the studio version appears as a B-side on that live single I talked about and placed earlier. I remember hearing this one a lot on the radio when I was growing up. And I'm talking after the live version hit. There was a lot of DJs out there that flipped it over and they played the studio version. Maybe some of you remember that differently than I do, but I remember hearing the studio version a lot. This is the one that is very near and dear to me as a single specifically. You know, nowadays when they play Rock and Roll All Night, the live version, when you hear it on Sirius XM or you hear it on your local FM stations, they're not playing that chopped up bad single version that they put out back in 1975. Usually they're just playing the version that comes right off of Kiss Alive. So you need to understand that as well. Anyway, for me, Rock and Roll All Night, it has to be number 1. It's the number 1 song. I mean, this is the song that the band ended their career with, essentially. I know some of you don't believe they're gone for good. I think they are, whether they like it or not. They're just too old. At this point, I don't think they can do it anymore. But this was the song that they ended their career with. The live version would have ranked higher if they hadn't butchered the singles. So I had to go with the studio version. And Yeah, I feel pretty strongly about this one. All right, and there you have it. Man, that's a long list. That's a lot of singles, and we didn't even include certain ones. Like I said, they didn't even have, there are singles missing from this box set. They didn't have Talk to Me. They didn't have Creatures of the Night. They didn't have Killer. They didn't have there might be, I think there was a single for Then She Kissed Me. There's a bunch of them that didn't make it into the box set. So I just wanted to focus on this box set since I have it, and these are the singles that I listen to if I put on singles to listen to. So let me know what you thought of this list. I know some of you are going to argue with me about some of this. That's okay. Our listening experiences are personal to us, but I would love to know, what are your top singles? Even if you just tell me your top 5, if you don't want to rank all 29 of them, I get it. But let me know, what would be your top 5 singles? And specifically, I'm not just talking about what's your top 5 favorite Kiss songs. I mean, what's your top 5 favorite singles in the single versions, okay? If you're going to argue with me about Detroit Rock City and how that should be top 5, yeah, well, you need to go and listen to the single version and tell me if you still feel the same way, because that single edit is just hot garbage, okay? And that's why it's not in my top 5. And this was all about specifically ranking the singles and how they sound and appeared in single format. And that's it for me. I will be back soon with more album rankings, all kinds of music stuff we're going to be talking about. I keep bringing it up. I'm going to do Queen, AC/DC, The Beatles, Led Zeppelin, maybe some Ozzy. I've got all sorts of stuff I'm planning on talking about, and I would love to hear from you what you would like to see and hear me talk about. But until then, go spin some records, listen to something great, and have an awesome day. See you soon.